Akumajo Dracula, or Demon Castle Dracula, was originally released in 1986 for the Nintendo Family Computer Disk System expansion module, and would later be localized into cartridge form for the Nintendo Entertainment System under the title most people are familiar with, Castlevania. Castlevania on the NES would be the first in a long line of games that would span multiple consoles and multiple formats, but that's a game most people already know. And in most respects, the original disk system version of Vania bears very few actual differences, if any, from the cartridge version. For the uninitiated, you control a vampire hunter of the Belmont clan through 6 sections of the Demon Castle, and, using your mystic whip and assorted weapons you'll come across such as daggers, boomerangs, firebombs, and whatnots, slay anything preventing you from a deadly encounter with the Count himself. Controls for the game are straightforward: B button attacks, A button jumps, using up or down climb steps. Those familiar with old school Castlevania will recognize the control quirks associated with these games: stiff, uncontrollable mid jumps, problematic usage of sub-weapons on stairs, knockback. They're all present and accounted for here. So jumping from one version to the next gameplay-wise shouldn't be much of an issue, but the disc version of Akumajo Dracula possesses 3 elements that your usual NES version of Castlevania does not. A save feature where you can save your progress and begin at the last stage you left off at a time, load times, and having to switch the discs to the other side when prompted. The ability to save your game is a helpful aid for those having trouble with the latter parts of the game, or for those who wish to continue their progress in the game's second quest without having to beat the game every time. But Castlevania is a game where your best chances of survival in those later levels lies in being fully equipped, and starting a saved game is done with a clean slate, as if you're continuing a game after a game over. This ends up being a double-sided issue, as you might be able to save your progress, but your default status might make things a little more difficult, and the latter stages where 4 hits of any kind will kill you have more than their fair share of the difficulty. Around mid-2019, Konami had put out the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, a compilation of 8 titles from the franchise's early years and the subject matter of an earlier video. Sometime later, after that video was made, the game was updated to include the original Japanese releases. Sort of. The version of Akumajo Dracula included in this compilation is not the original Family Computer Disk System version, but rather a later version that was re-released in cartridge form for the original Family Computer in 1993. Much like the NES Castlevania, this version lacked a save feature, but in its place was an easy mode, which granted the player 10 lives, 30 hearts, damage inflicted by enemies was reduced by half, no longer suffering from knockback whenever you took a hit, allowed you to keep your multipliers when collecting a new sub-weapon, allowed you to keep your sub-weapon and multiplier whenever you died, and even made the boss fights ridiculously easy to the point of being complete pushovers thanks to their lesser health. In other words, this is Akumajo Dracula Redacted, the game that holds your hand all the way through. Great for newbie players, but other than perverse curiosity, useless to anyone who knows this game like the back of their hand. Visually, Akumajo Dracula is a suitably gothic game for its day with plenty of background detail and varied settings. Each of the 6 areas you explored were distinct and provided their own eerie atmosphere, something of a unique concept that would slowly but surely become the norm on the platform. You had creepy looking enemies, a fluidly animated brown hero, and sprite flicker galore. Even for a 1987 game, this looks pretty good, and it's complemented by some of the better chiptunes of its day, being the origin of some of the series' most recognizable themes, including the main vampire killer theme, which opens up the first level of the game and would be replayed in some form or another in every other Castlevania game released later on. As for the sound effects, they're somewhat simplistic and standard stuff, nothing out of the ordinary, although not ear-grindingly bad. On the plus side, the grunt that Simon does whenever he gets hit sounds pretty cool. They use it for several games, so it has to sound cool, I suppose. I don't know, it's a nice little grunt. I like the grunt. Overall, okay, look, this is one of those mileage varying things, so take it or leave it. This is my thoughts on the matter. Akumajo Dracula for the Family Computer Disk System version has a save feature that might be useful for some folks, but requires a Famicom Disk System module, which isn't all that easy to find. But, you know, you're not talking about an actual Famicom, but there's clone systems for that sort of thing, I suppose, and, you know, even that other issue would probably be resolved eventually, but I digress. On the flip side, the re-released cartridge version has an easy mode in lieu of the save feature, which might come off as hand-holding, but for those who need it, that's also an option. Honestly, other than curiosity or sating a fandom or whatever the case may be, filling a hole in a collection or just sating that curiosity, there's nothing in the Japanese originals beyond the extra bits that you can't already get in the localized Castlevania game, because they're both pretty much the same game at the end of the day in terms of gameplay, sounds, and graphics. It's not like Castlevania 3 where they had an extra enhancement chip in the Japanese version that made this game sound and look a little better. Both versions play the same and are practically interchangeable. So in that regard, if you haven't played the original Castlevania, there's plenty of ways to do it. The aforementioned Anniversary Collection, the original game pack, whatever virtual console service is still active, I'd imagine not much anymore, the NES Classic Edition mini console if you could still find one of those somehow. There's even a re-release for the Game Boy Advance as part of the classic NES series, so it's not a hard game to find. It might seem ancient due to some quirks and the difficulty pounds on you hard in the latter half of the game, but it's still a fun game and it holds up fairly well. And while I'm thrilled that the Anniversary Collection has the Japanese versions you could sample, if you want your Castlevania fix, especially for the first game, the localized version will serve your needs just fine. But if you want to go that extra step and try those Japanese versions, by all means do so. Any way you slice it, it's a great game. Bit tough at times and might be disheartening at times, but when you conquer that game, it's a thing. That's really all I got. That's how we're ending it. Sorry. Bye.